I found out I was pregnant and I drank. That was the thing. That was the rock bottom that made me see the truth of you are drinking against your will. I wouldn't have known those words, but I drank in tears. I was so spiritually asleep. I didn't even realize I'm not drinking for a couple of months. I remember one day kind of realizing, oh my God, I haven't even thought about alcohol in like months, and kind of realizing that's not normal for me. Turning that pain into purpose, I think, is a gift that we all get given, a unique gift for alcoholics and addicts that we can help others with our past. I think that is fantastic.
Hello and welcome to 12 Steps and 12 Questions. My name is Silvio and I'm an addict. This pod is full of personal and inspirational stories of recovery from addiction. And in every episode, I'll ask each guest the same 12 questions about their life, addiction and recovery. Quick warning, there will be some graphic descriptions and a healthy amount of swearing. For this episode, please welcome Dorinda. Hi Dorinda, thank you so much for being my guest today on 12 Steps and 12 Questions. I'm so glad you're here. Would you like to introduce yourself quickly?
Hey Silvio, my name is Dorinda and I'm an alcoholic from Dublin in Ireland.
Brilliant. I'd say let's jump right into it and start with our question one, which is, did you have any adverse childhood experiences?
I think my early childhood was really quite idyllic. We grew up in a place in Dublin called Bayside, which, as the name indicates, is beside the bay, so right beside the water and the beach, and it was really, really lovely. And we had a nice, big enough house. I've two sisters. We all get on really well. It was all quite nice. Although my dad is an alcoholic, and as I was growing up, he'd spend a lot of time in the local pub, and he also had like clinical depression. So there was often times when he'd just be in bed for like weeks on end. And the relationship, I didn't really know this it's kind of, when I look back, I can see it. But the relationship between him and my mom, they had separate bedrooms kind of thing. But I just thought that was normal because that's all I knew. But we had a really happy household. Like my folks did their best. But my mom didn't drink at all when I was really young. My mom only started drinking when I was about 16. And like it says in the big book, sometimes women within a few years go beyond recall. She falls into that category. And when I was 20, so I don't know if 20 constitutes childhood. But when I was 20, I had an experience of finding her dead body basically in her bedroom. And that had a huge impact on me. And also the years leading up to that when she started drinking. So my latter teenage years were very traumatic, but my early childhood wasn't.
It must be an incredibly difficult thing to go through. I mean, aside from what happened in your early childhood, and it was clearly still, by what you're saying, marked by your father's alcoholism. Mm-hmm. So you grew up with alcoholism around you. You grew up with alcohol and with alcoholism around you.
Yeah.
And that clearly had an early impact.
Yeah, I mean, I have memories of like hiding in the wardrobe upstairs at maybe the age of like 5 or 6 when my folks would be downstairs fighting. I don't think it ever got physical or anything, but there'd be raised voices. And I remember me and my sister like huddling together in the wardrobe and being really scared. And my dad's, he was a lovely, lovely man and very gentle and stuff. But when he was drinking, he was like a whiskey drinker and he'd get this look in his eye and he scared me as a kid. He never laid a hand on me, but it was that sort of, I didn't like alcohol. Like I didn't like when I could smell it on him. And so I was quite scared of alcohol and how he would change,
Now, just come to think of it, when you were so young and a child, really, did you associate this with alcohol? Did you sort of, when you were 6, 7, 8, something like that, did you understand the concept of there is this drink and when daddy drinks this drink, I get scared of him? Was there some awareness like that around that?
Yeah, there definitely was. There was this bottle of, I think it was a type of sherry. I don't know if you guys have it in the UK. It was called Sandematties. Right. And the bottle was had a picture of a man on the front with it was like a shadow of a man and he had a black hat on, like a kind of I don't know, a cowboy and western hat on. And he reminded me of the man from Poltergeist, you know, that old man in Poltergeist. And anytime I saw that bottle come out of the cabinet, I'd be like, oh, and it was called Sandman. And I just thought he was like this evil Sandman. And I knew that when that bottle came out, there was probably going to be a fight, or I was scared. So I did know that, like, when my dad went to the pub, he came back a different person. I knew there was something, and I didn't like the smell of it and stuff. So yeah, at a very infant level, I did know that there was something altering about alcohol.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it sounds like you were otherwise well cared for, but to have this, I suppose, threat around the house more or less at all times must have been an destabilizing, I suppose, influence on you and your emotional security. Mm-hmm.
It was something I often thought was that my dad was quite weak, which I've come to learn since I learned about the nature of alcoholism, that it's actually nothing to do with weak will. But I always kind of thought my dad was a bit of a weak man. Like, my mom would ask him not to drink and he would just do it anyway. And he would just, you know, spend his time in the pub. I just thought he was, you know, friends of mine, even at that young age, they'd have like family dinners together. We never did that. We'd never sit down at the table together and have dinner or anything. And they'd go on like foreign holidays. We never did that either. And I just thought, like, I knew we were different. I knew our family was different. And, you know, that my dad, I didn't view him as this like John Wayne male figure, like man of the household, earning the money, because he always had depression. He was in and out of hospital. And I equated that with him being very weak and just drinking. And I guess on reflection, I kind of lost some respect for him, I think, as like a man. Although I probably wouldn't have thought that at the time. But I never saw him as like the head of the household. It was more because my mom did everything for us and she held the whole house together, and she's the one that I would turn to with everything, was my mom.
So if that is the case, but then it must have been even more difficult to see your mum descending into the same issue that your father had, and that made you feel insecure about your life and your emotional security, right? So here's your dad, and you know that dad has got a problem, or that there is issues with dad. That's all we really understand at that sort of age. And then the person that you always turn to, your rock, also starts engaging, I suppose, in that sort of behavior. And you said it happened fairly quickly as well. So that must have been another really difficult thing for you in your childhood and your teenage years.
Yeah, and it was really sudden. Like, she kind of went from not drinking at all, having like the odd little Baileys at Christmas kind of thing, and she'd get really giddy. And we used to think it was kind of cute and funny, like, oh my God, look at mom, because she'd get sort of like silly. And then she'd just go to bed, and, you know, it was she wouldn't drink again for another year.
Yeah, and that's much more harmless, of course, as a concept than, you know, the evil poltergeist sort of coming out of the closet.
Yeah, exactly. And then, yeah, I remember coming home one day from school, and she was just sitting at the kitchen table. And there was a bottle of like vodka, and it was like some kind of Polish cheap vodka. I think it was vodka spelt with a W, like vodka type thing, you know. And she was at the kitchen table just with glass eyes, absolutely hammered. And I remember being like, what are you doing? What's going on? And it really just seemed to take a hold of her so rapidly. And, you know, within 4 or 5 years, she was dead. Like, it's absolutely like it says in the big book. She was gone beyond recall. And it was terrifying, because she wasn't like that before. And she turned into a completely different person, physically, mentally, everything. It was horrendous. That was really, really traumatic. And then it obviously ended in her untimely death, which was also, I happened to find her. So that was the icing on a horrible cake.
Yeah. And we will return to that moment later on. And it's really almost counterintuitive to ask the second question now. But the second question is, what at the moment you first got hooked, the fun times, what did that look like? Now, here's the paradox. And of course, addiction and recovery are full of paradoxes, aren't they? But here's the paradox. So you've got your dad and the evil poltergeist coming out of the closet and making you, scaring you, essentially, and you also see that maybe this wasn't quite the case yet, but, you're also perhaps seeing that your mum is having issues. It, to all intents and purposes, this should put you off alcohol forever, but it didn't. At some point, alcohol was introduced into your life. So what did the fun times look like, the good times?
Well, my first drink was on Halloween night when I was maybe like 14 or something at a bonfire near our house. And I think a boy just handed me a can of cider and I drank it. And I remember kind of falling around the hill and like the fire. I loved the smell of fire and there was just an amazing atmosphere. And I just thought, oh my God, this is amazing. So I loved alcohol from the moment that I drank it. And
Did you not have any sort of fear around this? I mean, you knew what happened with your dad and all of that, and this could create issues.
No, bizarrely, I didn't. I really didn't. It's like in Bill's story when he says ominous warnings I failed to heed. I didn't. And even if somebody had sat me down and told me, no, I just wouldn't have been able to hear the truth at that time, I don't think. And then when I was kind of 18, 19, I started going out with a kind of an older guy and I thought he was so cool. He had like a leather jacket. It turns out he was like a drug dealer and stuff. And he'd get me into all these really cool nightclubs. And I was always really into music. And I started going out with a guy who was the lead singer of a really successful band. They ended up getting signed and things. And our life became, it was incredible. So we were like young. I was like going out with the lead singer and we would just drive around Ireland. We'd go over to Berlin and stuff like that. They'd play gigs. I'd be in the crowd. I love dancing as well. And we'd always get to go backstage. We'd be just smoking joints and drinking. And it was so much fun. And if somebody said to me, yeah, you're an alcoholic, I would have said, if this is alcoholism, sign me up. Bring it on. I absolutely loved it. And for me, that lasted quite a long time. Like, even I don't even really recall getting that many hangovers then. It was just, and if I did, I just didn't care. It was loads of fun. It really was. And I loved it.
Isn't it weird? Sorry to interrupt you. I just had a brainwave here. Isn't it weird how well we seem to be able to cope early on with hangovers? Mm-hmm. And in the consequence-free zone, right? I remember this as well. No matter how many pills I dropped or whatever, I'd been, the first year or so, I was tired or whatever, but I didn't become the living hell that it was to become later in the hangovers, right? That's what happens early on.
Yeah, the four hideous horsemen, I would have been like, what? What are you talking about? They weren't circling my bed. By the end, they were like my constant companions. Yeah, well, enemies, not companions. But yeah.
Yeah. So here you are. You're sort of traveling around Ireland and Berlin, and you're having a great time. You had arrived. You're going out with a cool guy, leather jackets, the whole 9 yards. And how did it progress from there? I'm sure that there was a bit more fun to be had before the first consequences arrived.
Yeah, it went on like that for quite a while, like just really, really good fun. And I definitely was like, say we were going to a gig on the Saturday night and on Thursday evening we were leaving Dublin and we're packing up the van and stacking it with beer and cigarettes and stuff. If I was struck dead there, I would have died happy. That was my most happiest moment, was knowing that there's not just one night of booze ahead, that there's a whole weekend of debauchery. It would make me so elated. I loved it. Or like if there was a wedding, I'd be like, oh my God, there's a barbecue the next day. That means no one's going to go home. And I thought that was kind of normal. And I guess the lads I was hanging out with as well were like that too. So none of us wanted the party to stop. And there was always somebody I could find who would drink with me. And like, I think I started like missing work a lot. I think that would have been the first indicator that, okay, this isn't good. You're kind of, at the time I thought, choosing to keep drinking on a Sunday night when even the lads are like, no, we've been drinking since Wednesday. It is actually time to stop. And I'd be always the one that would just keep on going and not care if I even lost a job. I went through so many jobs. I had a different job like every couple of weeks, and I just wouldn't care. It was just, my life was just booze, booze, booze. Looking back now, that's not normal either. It's all I cared about was getting wasted. Particularly after my mom died, I sought escapism on an even deeper level then. You know, I couldn't cope with what had happened. I was so sad and heartbroken, and alcohol was my solution to that.
Do you want to, you absolutely don't have to, but do you want to share a little bit about finding your mother?
Yeah, it's one of those memories that's like etched in my mind that I'll never forget, you know. And I'd been in my boyfriend at the time's house. It was a Saturday afternoon, and we were going out that night. And I went home. My mom owed me money, and I went upstairs. And I remember seeing a glass and a bottle of brandy on the stairway, and was like, "Oh, here we go." And I went into her room, and she was like slumped over the bed, and her head was kind of facing downwards, you know, like towards the carpet. And I stood there and I was like, I want to go out tonight and you owe me money, and look at the state of you there again. And like, Jesus Christ, it's only 4 o'clock in the day. And I just started like giving out to her. And then something in me just like, something's not right here. And I remember I just went over and I put my hand on her back, and it was like ice cold, like ice, you know, really cold. And I remember I just glanced downwards, and whatever way her head had been hanging, I was told afterwards the blood had all rushed to her head. So it was all over her face. So it was a really graphic, it was on the carpet. And I remember just being like, oh my God. And I went downstairs in just such a state of shock. I remember turning on the television in the room below, like, so she's above me, and Sabrina the Teenage Witch. Do you remember that program? This used to be on like Nickelodeon. It was this girl who had a talking cat. I remember that was on, and I watched about 5 minutes of it. And I remember in my head saying, I'm watching Sabrina the Teenage Witch. It's Saturday. These kind of almost speaking in mantras to keep myself calm. I remember it really clearly, just thinking, my name is Dorinda. It is Saturday. I can't cope, you know? And then just going out and ringing an ambulance and saying, hi, I think my mom is dead. I came home, I found her, and they said, okay, will you wait there? And I said, yeah. And then I put the phone down and I didn't wait there. I went out, we lived by the seafront, and I remember just walking along the seafront. I literally couldn't stop walking. It was like all this energy inside me, and I was just pacing up and down the seafront. And then I came back, and I remember there was loads of people outside my house, and a police car and an ambulance. And I went over and kind of hovered in the driveway, and my neighbor came over and said, that's her, that's the daughter. And I just said, I'm not doing this. I think they wanted me to identify her or something. But anyway, there was a pub across the road from our house. And I just went over to the pub and ordered a pint and a whiskey. And then my friends all started arriving at the pub, and I just drank. And my dad was actually in hospital at the time, in a mental health, depression, alcoholism kind of it's a hospital called Port Rann. It's quite famous in Dublin, like a psychiatric ward. And I remember thinking, like, how on earth am I going to tell him, like, that his wife has just died, you know? And both of my sisters lived abroad at the time. One was in Australia and one was in Germany. One was in Cologne. And I knew I had to tell them as well. So, I mean, it was horrible. It was horrible.
And even though you knew that your mum died of, is it fair to say that she died of an alcohol-related disease?
Acute alcohol poisoning, yeah.
Right, okay. I'm just trying to be extra careful.
How did you not know alcohol was bad?
No, I was just trying to be careful with my wording. You see, do you think that it's fair to say that a non-addict, a non-alcoholic would have probably just stayed off alcohol? But we can't.
Yeah. They would have... The last thing they probably would have done is gone to the pub when their mom has just died. And particularly the years preceding that, of seeing her disintegrate from this lovely, wonderful woman into an absolute just train wreck. I was really sad what happened to her. Her decline was awful. My heart was broken. Like I love that woman so much. And it's funny as well. I kind of knew, I remember maybe about a week before she died, seeing her just on the street one day, and she waved at me. And some part of me knew I'd moved out at that stage because I just couldn't be around her anymore, you know. And I remember saying it to my older sister at the time. I had this feeling, this intuitive feeling that I'd never see her again, that she was going to die. I really did. I remember she waved at me and I walked away and was inconsolable. And I remember saying to my sister, I just feel like I'm never going to see Mom again. And then, yeah, a few days later, she did actually die. It is a strange experience. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry you had to go through such an awful experience. It's interesting, though, that you would say that this would be a turning point for your own alcoholism, right? Mm. The death of alcoholism being the petrol on the flames of your own alcoholism. Mm. Did you have any awareness at all there around that time?
No, I really, really didn't. I think because at that point, alcohol still worked for me. You know, I absolutely loved it. So even though I probably knew that I drank a bit too much, but, you know, everyone around me was doing the same. And yeah, my mom had died of alcohol poisoning, but I kind of thought, I mean, she was drinking around the clock. She wasn't eating anymore. Whereas I have like a job and I go to college and I have loads of friends and I'm only 21, you know? So I didn't think I had a problem with alcohol. I thought alcohol was dangerous if you abused it, but, you know, I wasn't abusing it. I was just having fun, and it was helping me to sleep. It was helping me to get through this awful thing. I loved it. I would have defended it at that stage.
And it was still doing something for you that you could not do for yourself.
Very much, yeah.
Our question 3 is, what were your worst consequences and finally your rock bottom? Now, obviously, this may cover quite a long period of time for many people. And of course, as ever, I need to caveat it. Not everybody has a rock bottom. And, you know, sometimes people don't come in on the back of one. But let's just see how it progressed from there in terms of this turning point that you experienced with your mum and your mum's death. Mm. And then, you know, you drink more and more. There's no awareness at all from what you're saying. So how did it continue and how did it progress?
I think then through my kind of early 20s, it was still working for me. I think it actually helped me get through my mom's death. I don't know how I would have coped, particularly because my dad was in a psychiatric ward. And even when my dad found out that my mom died, he didn't understand. I remember having to go up to the hospital and tell him, and he was on so much medication. He was like, huh, what? Like he couldn't grasp it. And I felt so alone and frightened in the house, and alcohol actually helped, you know, at that point. But then over the years, yeah, I guess I did start to realize me and that guy broke up. So I kind of drifted away from that whole band musician kind of world, which I thought I was only drinking so heavily because, you know, rock and roll. But then when I drifted away from then, I was still drinking really heavily and losing jobs and not able to show up when I said I would. And so the understanding that, okay, you know, I actually can't seem to really control this thing, but I still loved it. I guess for me, the hideous horsemen started to appear, like we spoke about earlier. My hangovers, the way I would feel when I woke up the next day, stopped being like, fuck it, it's just a hangover, I'll just have a nice cold beer. It started being like I'd wake up and be racked with shame and guilt. Even if nothing had happened the night before, it seemed to be every time I drank, I started to get anxiety, and it stopped working really. And my consequences started really getting a lot bigger as well, not just losing jobs, like leaving jobs in like a blaze of glory kind of thing, you know, like my attitude towards life, like calling my boss an asshole and storming out thinking I'm like, you know, queen of the universe kind of thing. I stormed out of so many jobs and things like, you know, going on holidays with my friends and, acting so bad on the airplane that the police would be waiting in our destination to escort me off. And my friend saying to me, like, yeah, we're not going away with you anymore. And it would have been because we'd be drinking before takeoff. And then the air hostess wouldn't be serving me fast enough. So I'd go up and take booze out of the cart and get caught. It would be stuff like that. And then, when you land, they don't like when you do that, when you serve yourself. So, funny that. And then, going on holidays and getting so messy and not wanting to see any of the sights and just drinking and then people commenting on it. And it all it stopped being fun. It started just being, as Bill says, my drinking assumed more serious proportions and it became a necessity. And I did see that happening. I knew it was no longer a luxury. I started drinking in pubs around Dublin by myself. I'd go in with like a book. So I'd try to look intellectual, like, oh, look at me, I'm reading Oscar Wilde, drinking a whiskey. But I just looked like an alcoholic. It's Monday afternoon. Why aren't you at work? Like, why are you sitting in here just because you have paper and pen in your hand? You don't look intellectual. You look really unwell.
It's really interesting, this, isn't it? That we, at least for a while, were able to, and then certainly longer than we think we're able to, we go on to hide our drinking using behind a veneer either of rock and roll is always, really good one, or, I try to hide it behind sort of, turtleneck artiness and all that kind of stuff. Or just being just a bit of a misfit, somebody who calls out bullshit, I'll tell the boss to his face, that he's an asshole and all those sort of things. But really, what happens is that we're just struggling really, really badly. And it sounds like you struggled very badly.
Really badly. And I kind of used my mom's death. I wouldn't have thought so, but I see it now that the truth is kind of being revealed to me that, anybody I'd go out with, any guy I'd start going out with, I'd make sure to tell him very early on what had happened to my mom. And I realize now that was to excuse my own drinking, so that when I started drinking out of control, he couldn't give out to me, because poor Dorinda lost her mother, though. It's really tragic and you can't say anything to her. And I'd tell bartenders as well. I'd go in and like, can I get a Guinness and like 2 shots of whiskey? Like, my mom died of alcoholism and it was really traumatic. And they'd be like, oh God. So I used it to get sympathy. And that, any misbehavior I would do then. And people were really easy on me, because people did always say, oh my God, what happened was so awful. And I got loads of sympathy from that. I
can see why. I mean, if your dad is in hospital and he's clearly an unwell man, that in and of itself is a difficult situation. You then lose your mother in the circumstances also. You would get sympathy.
I also lost him then in very tragic circumstances too. So he fell.
Your dad?
Yeah, my dad, a few years later, leaving the pub, and he fell in a laneway. I was living in London at the time, actually, and he fell in a laneway. Whatever way he landed, his hip broke, and it was raining that night, and he was only wearing a t-shirt. And apparently, he was found the next morning by like the milkman going to deliver milk, and he was soaked through, and he couldn't get up because of the hip thing, and he started to have multiple organ failure. So I got a phone call in London saying, like, you need to come home now. And I came home and he was in the ICU and I was the only one there. So I had to make such a difficult decision of, do you want us to unplug the machines? And that as well was such a traumatic, and it was a huge thing to put on somebody. I mean, I was only, what age was I then? Like 28 or something. Yeah. And that was very traumatic. I loved my dad to bits, and it was just awful. But again, I just drank.
It's horrific.
Yeah, it was really horrific. And I just drank too, I guess. At the time, I thought cope with that as well. But looking back at that stage, when I lived in London, my drinking was off the walls bad by that stage anyway. The fun was kind of gone out of it.
Were you able to keep down a job at that time?
If you're enjoying this podcast and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe.
Like sporadically, I'd have a job for like 3 months and then I'd go on a bender and lose it. Then I'd be all amazing in an interview again and land a great job. And then 3 months later, I'd go on a bender and lose it. That was kind of, I was in that cycle, convincing myself it was all under control and it's fun and it's...
Amongst all these pretty bad consequences, was there a worst one that pushed you into recovery, or didn't it work in that sort of almost linear fashion as I'm describing it?
The thing that really pushed me into recovery was a delusion getting smashed, really. And the delusion for me was that despite all of these, consequences, arrests, everything I've just talked about, that if I ever got pregnant, I would be able to stop. I hand on my heart believe that I really, truly did. And I wanted to be a mother like so badly. So I thought, I want this so badly. And I always wanted a boy, more so than a girl. I don't know why. I just had this idea of a little boy. And if that was to happen, I'd be fine. Me and this little boy would just be the happiest little pair. It would be amazing. It would be like the opposite of what I went through, And then I found out I was pregnant and I drank. And I remember that the whole duration of my pregnancy, that was the thing. That was the rock bottom that made me finally see the truth of you are drinking against your will. I wouldn't have known those words, but I drank in tears. There was no joy. There was nothing sociable about this. It was horrendous. Yeah. There's not like you can't, nobody's that much in denial or deluded that they can be like, wow, what are you all about? This is fine. When you're like 6 months pregnant with a can in your hand, it's, come on now. Like,
exactly. There comes the point where it is clearly not about fun anymore. There's no, the veneer that, was talking about earlier, whatever your veneer might have been, the rock and roll or the artiness or whatever it is, it's all gone. It is clearly gone. And even you yourself can see that it's gone,
Yeah.
So I'd imagine you must have felt absolutely awful about drinking against your own will while you were pregnant. It must have been a huge issue for you.
It really was. And I told them in the maternity hospital, I remember going over to my scans, you have a scan every couple of weeks, and just looking around this room of pregnant, glowing women, who probably had like smoothies and vitamin B tablets that morning, whereas I'd had like half a bottle of wine and no sleep. And it was so mentally as well. It's frightening being pregnant anyway, without your own kind of parents being there and stuff. I was really, really alone. It was terrifying. And when I told them in the hospital, they were telling me things like, well, why don't you take up knitting and like knit clothes for the baby and get baby catalogs and look at photos, look at pictures of babies. So I would do that. I'd come home and look at, like, I'd buy little baby clothes and look at them. But I'm like, I don't understand though. Like, but I'm still drinking. Like, this isn't, how is looking at a teeny tiny pair of socks going to stop this, cascade of alcoholism? You know what I mean? And it didn't work. I drank right up to, I remember saying to my best friend, Brian, at the time, I'm going to go into labor drunk. Can you imagine? And I remember he just said, yeah, you are. And I was like, but like, comfort me. He said, well, no, it's the truth. It was horrible.
Weren't you worried? I'm sure you were. You must have been worried about the health of your baby.
So worried. And I think part of me, though, didn't believe we'd survive. I really didn't. I felt like I was going to die and that I would take this little child with me. And part of me wanted that. So by the end, I think I kind of surrendered to, it's over anyway. Like, I'm done. So I'm going to just do this to a point where someone does just come in and find me. And like, I couldn't do anything about it. I was literally the definition of powerless. And yeah, I mean, it was over. It was over, yeah.
This is our question 4. Did you ever want to die? Did you consider suicide?
Funny, given what I've just said, but I wouldn't say I actively actually wanted to die or commit suicide. I never had a suicide attempt. I didn't want to die, but I knew I couldn't live the way I was living, and I didn't want to live the way I was living, and I was deeply unhappy. I didn't really want to die, but I thought that I would. I knew I couldn't control my life anymore. And I was okay with dying. I was kind of like, look, if I die, yeah, the world's probably better off. This is it now. Yeah.
I've said this many times. There is a suicidal aspect to our drinking and using once we are progressed to that sort of stage. We know we could go over. I can't begin to imagine what it would have been like to have that, and while you're carrying someone else, it's I think we are addicts and alcoholics because we're addicts and alcoholics. We don't really know how it comes about, really, and it doesn't really matter. And we can talk all day long about whether you're born with it or not, or nature, nurture. It doesn't matter. Step one, cleverly and truthfully, says we admit it. It only says that we admit it. We were powerless over alcohol. It doesn't say, oh, we were born alcoholics, or we became alcoholics, right? But it is true that we are that because we are that. But it is also true that trauma fans the flames of alcoholism, of our addiction. And if you look at the amount of trauma you had, it's perhaps no surprise that you were really pushed over the edge there.
Yeah, definitely. I can see, looking back, how it all kind of transpired,
Our question 5, what other methods did you try to get sober before finding the rooms?
I never tried to get sober per se. Like, I never tried. I was never like, that's it, I am done, I'm going to abstain forever, because I never wanted to. That's the truth. I always thought, I tried to control my drinking for sure. I'd wake up on a Monday having rang in sick and be like, I am done. Like, Bill, this time I meant it. And I'd have such high resolve until like Wednesday. And then I'd start to feel a bit better. And my boss might have believed I was sick and I got away with it. And I'd be like, all right, not so bad. Maybe if I can just drink Thursday to Saturday. So I did that whole kind of trying to drink on certain days thing. And I did go to an addiction counselor at one point. That didn't do anything for me, really. I went to counseling, like bereavement counseling, thinking if I could get a handle on all the sadness in my life. I believed I was drinking because I was so sad about what had happened and lonely, and but that didn't work. So my main thing was just willpower, was just like mustering all my strength, and I'd only ever last about 3 days, and then I would drink again, and it was really tiring. It was exhausting,
White knuckling is extremely exhausting.
Yeah, it's horrible. Eating food, all those stupid things like, oh, if I eat pasta before I go out, I'll be okay. Or if I only drink Guinness and nothing else. But then midway through my first Guinness, I'm like, oh, I wouldn't mind a red wine. So any idea I had, I would supplant like so quickly with whatever I actually wanted to do, which was get completely hammered, Yeah. I never really wanted to stop. That's the truth. I never fully wanted to stop.
So even at your worst, when you were pregnant with 6 months pregnant or so, you really didn't want to stop?
When I was pregnant, that was I would say the only time that I genuinely didn't want to live that way anymore, and was like, I really did want to stop then. But I was still in the clutches of King Alcohol, though. He was still my master, and part of me was still almost like, but if I have to die instead, then that's kind of okay. I mean, it's such a baffling, it's such a layered and multifaceted illness. It's kind of hard to describe. I'm sure you understand because you're similar, but
I think it's impossible to explain it to someone who isn't affected really properly. I think you have to be one. It takes one to know one, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Is my experience with it. So then you came into the rooms. Our question 6 is, did you struggle with the word God?
I didn't struggle really with the word God. I thought the word God was very uncool. Like when someone would say, oh, God will help you or something, I go, oh, God. I kind of cringe inside. So that word, I was a bit like, oh, it made me bristle. However, I did believe very firmly that there was something, that there's more to this world than meets the eye. I definitely believed that there was another realm, and something happened when my mom died that kind of perpetuated that. That was a very shaped my life really in many ways. I'll just tell you very quickly this experience. So my mom died in her room, as I said, and my sister Emer had flown home from Australia, and we were sitting at the kitchen table a couple of days after my mom had died, and Emer went up to my mom's room, and then she walked into the kitchen with this just look on her face of shock and was like, "You need to come with me up to mom's room, like now." And I was like, no, I don't want to go near that room. And she's like, "No, Dorinda, you need to come up." And my mom's room had always had a very distinctive smell of like my mom and kind of stale booze. And it was a very heavy, you know, you can imagine an alcoholic drinking heavily in a room and not opening the windows. And so it always had a particular smell. But I went upstairs with my sister and we went in, and you know, that incense that a priest shakes above a coffin when somebody dies, you know, that smell. And it smells like a church and it's very cleansing. The room was filled with that smell. We went in and it was like, I mean, overpowering to the point that we were coughing. It was like, and we stood there just in complete shock, just looking at each other like, oh my God. And then we went back downstairs and we were like, are we imagining that? Did you? And we both experienced it. And a few minutes later, we went back up and it was gone. It was back to my mom's smell. And I felt like that was her room being cleansed by some kind of entity. I don't know what, I could never explain it. But I had such comfort from that I kind of almost made a little bit of peace with her death in that moment even. I knew she was okay. There was something about it that I was like, she's fine. She's in good hands. And I've always believed that there's something. So the word God, yes, but the prospect of an entity, no.
Right.
No.
Okay. Amazing. Question 7 is, how do you experience your higher power today? You know, you've already shared a God moment. And how do you experience your higher power today from that time that when you came in, it was probably quite theoretical, up to what it is today?
I think I was so spiritually asleep that I didn't even realize I'm not drinking for a couple of months. I remember one day kind of realizing, oh my God, I haven't even thought about alcohol in like months, you know, and kind of realizing that's not normal for me. And that's something like I got a sponsor at my very first meeting. I came out of hospital after Jack was born. I went in with withdrawal and it was pretty horrendous. And I came out and I jumped onto a meeting and I got a sponsor straight away. And I think the minute we started reading like the doctor's opinion, I just knew this book is special. There's something about this. This Dr. Silkworth knows what he's talking about. And if my sponsor is telling me that it's an entity or a God or whatever, then I'm going to do whatever she says. And I think the fact that I wasn't drinking and didn't really have the compulsion to drink was my first indicator that something outside of me was helping me. Things like Jack coming into the world, my little boy, and actually being okay, you know, and just this sense of well-being, despite my life at the time still being very chaotic and being a single mother by myself and not really knowing what I'm doing, knowing in some weird level that everything is actually okay. Like you don't need to worry. So I had kind of serenity and yeah, it's kind of hard to articulate, but it's more of a feeling of protection, I guess, that I'm okay, that everything is always okay, you know?
Yeah. Did you experience the lifting of the obsession, the lifting of the wanting to drink early on then in your recovery? Because it took me quite a while. I remember it took me up to step 5, I think, where I first started glimpsing the light. And I stopped. Oh God, you know, I had this thing that, for instance, every time I'd step outside and there'd be a car maybe out waiting somewhere nearby my house, I thought, oh, look, it's some dealers and those sort of things. It wasn't straight kind of thinking, oh, I want to use, right? It's little bits and pieces that continuously remind you, you know, you walk past the cash machine, those sort of things, right? They would continuously remind me of, actually, I'm a cocaine addict, even if I didn't immediately want to use in that beforehand. I definitely wanted to once I had the thought. But if you're trying to see what I'm trying to say, so that whole obsession, that constant preoccupation with using, with, you know, I couldn't look at any of these things, you know, somebody sort of handling I don't know, straws in a supermarket, anything like that, it would immediately, yes, I know, it would immediately make me think about this and so on. So what I'm hearing from what you're saying is you didn't have that. It was more immediate for you.
Well, I did have that. When you say that, I did, but it was kind of like, I certainly didn't experience. I hear some people say, "Oh, the obsession was lifted." I didn't have this like, "Oh my God, I don't want to drink anymore." It wasn't like that. It was gradual. I think I was just so devastated by knowing that everything I was reading was true. I found it. I knew the doctor's opinion was true. So, some people say, "Oh, I was so relieved to find out what was wrong with me." I wasn't relieved. I knew it was true. I was devastated. I was like, "Fuck, I relate to all of this. Oh no, that means that I am an alcoholic." But I think I just spent the first few months in such a daze, and I was just so upset. I just cried all the time. But I had this newborn baby as well to sort of focus on. And I knew after the hospital experience, the withdrawal I'd gone through, it was so horrendous. And this little tiny baby, my love for him kind of pushed me along that I would walk by like crowded pubs and Temple Bar and stuff and think, "Oh my God." But I also kind of knew that I wasn't going to go in. So there was that sort of protective thing. I didn't quite know what it was. But so I don't know when it lifted, but I felt safe quite early on, I guess.
Yeah, it doesn't. You're quite right. I mean, for most people, from what I understand, from what I hear, for most people, it doesn't lift in a sort of ta-da moment, but it's a really gradual 2 steps forward, 1 step back sort of process, during the time that you do the steps. That's certainly my experience as well. Slightly going off script here, but did you feel any sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Grief for your past life? I certainly did. Right. There was a period where I grieved the fact that and I said goodbye to drugs and alcohol and to that person that I used to be. And there was a bit of grief involved there. Did you experience something similar?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And even the madness of alcoholism, I loved it. I will always love alcohol. I absolutely love it. And I don't condemn alcohol for people who aren't alcoholic. Like, Jesus, hats off, have a ball. I just know that I can't join in, damn it. Yeah. But absolutely. I look back particularly on those days in my early 20s of like, traveling around with the band and just dancing like a lunatic and loving it. And I really miss that. And I miss the kind of the misadventures, that feeling when you're heading out the door on a Saturday night and you're like, anything could happen. That excitement that you don't quite get. Like I find recovery enthralling. I do. I love it. But I still now miss that sometimes and miss the sort of craziness and chaos of alcoholism, because it was a lot of fun. Even the kind of depraved, low, dark days, bar the pregnancy. Sometimes I'd wake up after like losing a job and something crazy happened and I'd almost just laugh and just get a can and be like, "Oh, Jesus." I still always found it kind of, I didn't take it that seriously. I know that probably sounds crazy given all the awful stuff that happened, but maybe it's part of my illness. I always still just thought, fuck it, in a way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? And again, I'm really aware that we're kind of going off script a little bit, but we'll return to it in a moment. I just find this fascinating. I am a great proponent of sober fun, right? So in other words, if you think that your life is boring, I mean, I remember really early on in recovery, a few of the people in my in one of the online groups that I'm part of, Hello to the Breakfast Club, they decided, lunatics that they are, that are going to go and do some sort of parachute jumping, just literally throw yourself out of a plane, at sort of 8:30 in the morning somewhere in the field in, I don't know, north of London. And, there are ways of excitement and of getting exciting stuff into your life and so on. It's just that we choose not to often, which is really interesting. But I think for everyone who really wants to have like a bit of excitement and just thinks, recovery is going to be so boring, there is stuff you can do which is pretty crazy without having to drink or use, or without hurting anyone, So there is a, if you are experiencing that sort of thing, I always think, I say this to my sponsees and and other people in meetings and stuff, is there's plenty of stuff that you can do.
And also, you can't be bored if you have a big book in your hand. That book is endlessly fascinating. And like, I find the whole realm of the spirit and the big book and speakers like Mark Houston, like that brings me so much joy. And I listen to him and I get excited about life, excited about actually living awake, because as he says, so many people go through life asleep, dreaming they're awake. And I can relate to that very much. That was me for so long. So to kind of be awakening now is like, it's fascinating. It's amazing. I don't find recovery in any way boring at all.
Let's return to our questions before we record an 8-hour podcast, which I think would be fun, but slightly hard to edit perhaps. Question 8: which parts of the steps were the most difficult for you?
Step one was like a juxtaposition of the most incredible, fascinating, beautiful, albeit only retrospectively, I would say, because at the time I didn't think it was beautiful. Experience. I think step one, coming in, having never been in AA before, learning for the first time all about the physical allergy, the mental obsession, the spiritual malady. I was just absolutely fascinated. Bill Wilson, like everything about it. But I also found it absolutely devastating because I knew the fact that I could relate to every word on the pages, that I am an alcoholic, and that profound realization of that's why I can't hold down a job. That's why I've been acting the way. That's why every time I want to say at that lovely 4 drinks in level, I end up having like blackouts, and learning all about that and discovering the way I've been living and that I was actually asleep, and that I just found that unbelievable, but really, really difficult. Letting go of that, my old ideas, my past life of being an alcoholic to a degree, was incredibly difficult. Yeah, step one for sure.
Being an active alcoholic. Yeah.
An active alcoholic, yeah. I'll always be an alcoholic, obviously.
Yeah.
But
it sort of ties in a little bit with what we were saying earlier about that grief, when you come in first thing, that of letting that go and letting that part of you go. So yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Question 9, which character defects give you most trouble?
I think they all stem from self-centeredness. So selfishness would be the simple answer, but like branching out from that, I think an unlikely one is impatience. I'm really, really impatient to a degree, and it was a guy that we both know, who's young, actually said to me, that's actually a form of selfishness. You're in the queue in the supermarket thinking you should be first. Why is she in front of me? Like, I go into a cafe, there's even one person in the queue, I'm like, fuck's sake, in my head, or I sit down in a beautiful restaurant and like, why isn't the waitress here? Like, I want things instantly, like really impatient. And it actually makes you very, very unhappy. It's not a nice way to live because you're not kind of appreciating anything. I just want everything to be faster, better, so really impatient. And having very high kind of expectations of things. I'd go into a 5-star hotel and be critical of it, like, well, it's a dusty window ledge, and I don't like that about me. So I think it's what is that kind of having this being kind of entitled and thinking things should be a certain way, and self-centeredness really, and self-pity. I can really delve into self-pity very easily, and I can justify it. I would have you handing me Kleenex all day long and weeping like an Italian widow. I'd make you feel so sorry for me, when really there's loads of beautiful things in my life, but I would have you like devastated with all the sadness and that kind of melancholic. I can be very dramatic as well, It should probably notice, having gotten to know me. Yeah.
Interesting you choose Italian widows. I'd have always thought that Irish widows sort of leave nothing to be desired in that department, but
I'm picturing, the big kind of black hat and the veil, that real Italian style. Yeah.
I can picture Sophia Loren and
exactly
in the movies. Yeah, I hear you. Question 10, what is the best thing recovery has given you?
That inner sense of kind of peace and serenity, and the knowledge that there is more to this life than meets the eye. The knowledge and it's experiential knowledge as well, that there is another realm, that what we see is not all that there is, that there's not just a material world. There's a whole spiritual realm beyond this. And I just find that it just makes life so exciting. It really does. And all the wonderful people that you get to meet that are also trudging the road of happy destiny. And it's given me a sense of purpose as well. I was always just drifting along like, yeah, rock and roll, but with no real, it's like, but you're not a rock star. Like, you haven't written any songs. You're not even a singer. So, you know what I mean? Like, I never felt I fit in anywhere. I was just drifting and drinking and going along with the crowd and like, oh, I'm so creative, but I wasn't actually doing anything. So having purpose and being able to kind of take all that pain from my past and turn that into something positive, turning that pain into purpose, I think is a gift that we all get given, a unique gift for alcoholics and addicts, that we can help others with our past. I think that is just fantastic.
Yeah. I think finding purpose is also one of those things that I get the most out of since I've come into recovery. I couldn't agree more. Although I wasn't quite as, or perhaps I didn't look quite as lost as that, it is still true that I was deep down yearning for some way of making some sort of contribution. Always felt that life's a bit pointless, and that whole sort of French existentialism and all of that. And it wasn't until I came into recovery that I felt like, okay, I can actually, like you were saying, contribute something here. I can give other people, hopefully, maybe if not even a helping hand, but some direction, and taking people through the book, as you know, is one of the most amazing things that you can do in recovery. So,
yeah,
purpose is huge, absolutely.
Yeah.
Our next question: what would you say to a newcomer or someone wondering if they're an addict?
I would think by the very nature of wondering, that's probably a high chance that you are. But I would always go back to the physical allergy, because that's what differentiates us as a separate entity. So I would ask them quite simply, when you start drinking, can you control the amount that you take? Or do you just keep on going? Like, do you ever feel satisfied? Like, no, I'm just right now at 2 drinks. Or do you lose control? And also, when you are not drinking, can you control when you'll start again? If you decide not to drink, do you follow through? Or so have you lost the power of choice when it comes to drinking? And to be really, really honest about it, and to maybe think of examples and experiences, give them some of mine. If also the mental blank spot where we can't think of the consequences of even a week or a month ago. Are you having consequences? Are you paying more than the price of a pint for your drinking? It's something to look at.
Yeah, quite right. And our last question: what do you want your higher power to say to you, quote unquote, at the pearly gates?
That's a lovely question. And I think just welcome home. Welcome home. I would love that. And just, like it says more will be revealed, and welcome home. Like you're here. It's
wonderful. Thank you, Dorinda. You've been absolutely wonderful today in your honesty and your courage, and sharing your story with us, and sharing your traumas with us, but also sharing your recovery and the way you interpret recovery, the way you experience your recovery and your higher power. You've been wonderful in expressing all of that, and thank you so much for being here today. It was absolutely brilliant.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been really fun. Thank you. Thanks, Silvio.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you. So we're still rolling, That was great. Thank you so much. I'd like to quickly say to our listeners, we had a couple of connection issues on the way, but nothing too bad, I don't think so. I don't think that Dorinda's wonderful message will have been impacted. Do you feel that you've said everything, or did you leave something? Did you leave everything out on the field, if we want to go for a sporting analogy?
I hope I got across the fact that I'm not keeping myself sober, that I didn't, after my pregnancy and the withdrawal in hospital, go, enough is enough. I mean, you don't drink the way that I drank and then finally decide. I didn't decide this, you know what I mean? Like, I truly believe that we are surrendered, and that it was the grace of a loving God that brought me to my knees, and that planted that thought in my head of go to AA when I was in hospital, like, you're going to die. I feel like I was guided in here under the lash of alcoholism by God, that it's not me. I didn't go, I'm such a strong woman now, I'm a mother, I'm going to stop the madness. It's not me. And that it really is all about a higher power. That's my job, is to maintain my spirituality, but without his grace, I wouldn't even be in a position to do that. You know what I mean? I'd just be drunk in a field or dead. So that it's not, none of this is me,
I think that came through earlier in our conversation, but you've so wonderfully summed it up here. So that definitely came through, and it came through again. So that was absolutely brilliant. I loved it. I thought you were, as I was saying, you were very honest and in sharing all the bits and pieces, warts and all. And I really appreciate that you were here today. Thank you so much again, Dorinda, for being a guest on 12 Steps and 12 Questions.
Thank you, Silvio. I love this.
We've come to the end of this episode. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed it and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe. While this pod is based on the 12-Step Recovery Program, it's not officially affiliated with any 12-Step fellowship. 12 Steps and 12 Questions is not substance or behavior specific, it's fully self-supporting and not-for-profit. And you know this next bit. It's not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization or institution. It does not wish to engage in any controversy, and it neither endorses nor opposes any causes.